Back in the 80s, cartoons exploded. Before then, you'd have a few shows here and there, but by the mid-80s, studios were pumping out dozens of animated series each year, way more than in earlier decades. Problem was, the more they made, the more cartoons flopped, and some of them failed so badly they've completely disappeared from everyone's memory. So let's see if you remember these. This is not the Ghostbusters you're thinking of. This is a totally unrelated cartoon that came out around the same time, deliberately named Ghostbusters to cash in on the Bill Murray movie craze. Turns out Filmation, the company behind He-Man, actually owned the rights to the name Ghostbusters from an old live-action series back in 1975. That series was about two dudes and their gorilla sidekick fighting supernatural creatures. Barely lasted one season. But when the 1984 Ghostbusters movie became a huge hit, Filmation decided to quickly slap together their own cartoon version to cash in on the name recognition. Their show was about the sons of those original characters from the 70s, plus a talking gorilla. The series was flashy, colorful, and totally confusing for every kid who just wanted the real Ghostbusters from the movie. Columbia Pictures got so annoyed by this cheap knockoff that they immediately launched their own cartoon called The Real Ghostbusters, just to clear up the confusion. Wrestling was massive in the mid-80s, so big that the World Wrestling Federation decided to jump from the ring straight into Saturday morning cartoons. The star of the show was Hulk Hogan, obviously. Each episode had Hogan facing off against his real-life wrestling rivals like Rowdy Piper and the Iron Sheik. Sounds great, right? Except there was a weird problem. Hulk Hogan never actually voiced himself. Instead, they got Brad Garrett, the guy who played Robert on Everybody Loves Raymond, and Junkyard Dog was voiced by James Avery, Uncle Phil from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Fans hated it because none of the wrestlers sounded anything like themselves, and even Vince McMahon wasn't happy. After just 2 short seasons and 23 episodes, the Federation pulled support and the whole thing quickly faded away. Cartoons based on toys and merch were huge in the 80s. Transformers, Care Bears, you name it. But some of these shows just totally missed the point. The Get Along Gang came from characters originally created for greeting cards, which turned into plush toys. Studios figured, hey, kids like greeting cards, right? The pilot episode was actually pretty good, animated by the legendary Canadian studio Nelvana. But after the pilot, production switched over to DIC Entertainment, and things went downhill fast. The final result? Way too sugary and way too moralistic. Basically, it was a bunch of cute dressed-up animals going on super bland adventures, preaching teamwork every 5 seconds. Kids tuned out fast because it was boring compared to stuff like Transformers or G.I. Joe, and since streaming services pretty much forgot it exists, the Get Along Gang ended up being one of those weird nostalgia things only a tiny handful of people even remember today. Remember the Smurfs? Of course you do. But do you remember Snorks? Hanna-Barbera's underwater attempt at basically copying the Smurfs formula, except instead of tiny blue forest creatures, they had colorful sea creatures with snorkels sticking out of their heads. The snorkels could play music or make them swim faster, and every episode was about them having goofy adventures and dealing with a spoiled, rich snork named Junior. Here's the funny backstory. The creator actually tried to pitch Snorks as a collaboration to the Smurfs creator, Peyo. He politely said no. So Hanna-Barbera grabbed the idea anyway, hoping to cash in on Smurfs' popularity. Snorks ran for 5 seasons, but it never even came close to matching Smurfs' success. Toys barely sold, merchandise flopped, and today Snorks mostly lives on as that weird knockoff everyone assumes they dreamed up as a kid. Pac-Man was a monster hit in arcades, so naturally, Hanna-Barbera decided to turn him into a cartoon star. It was actually the very first cartoon ever based on a video game character, so you'd think they'd put some effort into it. They added arms and legs to Pac-Man, even gave him a wife and a kid. Problem was, Pac-Man had basically zero plot as a game, just running around chomping dots and ghosts. So the cartoon basically copied Roadrunner, ghosts chased Pac-Man, and he narrowly escaped every time. Pretty simple, right? But weirdly enough, some parent groups went ballistic. They complained about the violence of Pac-Man chomping on ghosts. ABC actually took the complaints seriously and toned things way down after season 1. By season 2, nobody was watching anymore, and Pac-Man faded away. Until, of course, nostalgia brought him back in countless other ways, but the cartoon is pretty much forgotten today. So basically, someone took Homer's Odyssey, threw it 1,000 years into the future, and turned it into a space opera. You've got Captain Ulysses piloting his spaceship, called, of course, the Odyssey, just trying to get home. After rescuing his son from a killer Cyclops, it's a futuristic Cyclops, of course, the Greek gods get pissed off, freeze his crew, and curse him to wander through space until he completes a quest. It's a weird mashup: sci-fi, mythology, space travel, existential dread, because, get this, Ulysses and his crew literally can't age or die. They're trapped until they finish their mission. And while the animation was honestly impressive, especially for the early 80s, with some genuinely psychedelic, spacey visuals, the problem was that American kids didn't get it at all. Too dark, too serious, and way too weird for Saturday mornings. Total flop in the US, even though Europe loved it. If you grew up watching American cartoons in the 80s, chances are you missed it entirely, probably too busy with simpler stuff like Smurfs or He-Man. Imagine tiny medieval dogs protecting royal treasure in a hidden castle. That's the Biskitts. Pretty simple setup: cute little dogs wearing adorable knight armor guard a castle full of jewels. King Max wants that treasure really badly, but Wags, leader of the Biskitts, keeps outsmarting him. It sounds cute, right? But the show never caught on, mostly because Hanna-Barbera clearly just tried to copy what had already worked. Think about it. It's like the Smurfs, Snorks, Shirt Tails all mashed up into one. Problem was, they forgot to give the Biskitts their own identity. One season, done, canceled. Not a disaster exactly, but a perfect example of why copying popular shows without adding anything fresh usually ends badly. Barely anyone remembers it now. This one's a classic 80s cartoon idea. Humans and aliens travel back to prehistoric Earth, strap futuristic weapons onto dinosaurs, and then fight each other riding these armed dinosaurs. You've got good guys called Valorians fighting bad guys called Rulons. The Rulons actually brainwashed dinosaurs by slapping mind control helmets on them. The whole cartoon was basically just one giant toy commercial for Tyco's Dino Toy line. The toys were actually incredible. Super detailed, scientifically accurate enough that the Smithsonian even displayed some of them. Cartoon flopped hard after just one season, because honestly, it felt like an extended commercial. But the toys still have a huge cult following among collectors today. Sometimes the toys really are better than the show. Back in the early 80s, video games were exploding in popularity. So someone had the bright idea of making a Saturday morning cartoon based entirely on arcade games. Donkey Kong, Frogger, Q*bert, all those early gaming icons got their own cartoon segments. Here's the problem though. These arcade games had basically zero backstory. The writers had to literally make up everything, like Frogger suddenly being a journalist getting constantly squashed, or Mario and Pauline chasing Donkey Kong around without Mario's famous accent. Also, licensing was a nightmare. Between seasons, characters like Donkey Kong got recast with totally new voices or completely changed looks. That inconsistency, plus the rising costs for game licenses and the massive video game crash of 1983, totally doomed the show. It lasted just 2 seasons, then disappeared almost entirely. This one's basically the most disturbing cartoon they made in the 80s. If you grew up watching Transformers or G.I. Joe, you might vaguely remember it. Same creative team, totally different vibe. Here you've got giant, grotesque, Lovecraftian monsters trying to destroy Earth. Seriously disturbing creatures straight out of a nightmare. Unlike most kids' cartoons, Inhumanoids went dark, really dark. You had characters getting crushed, zombified, mutated, all on Saturday morning TV. Networks freaked out, censored it heavily, and audiences didn't know what to make of it. Too scary for kids, too kiddie-ish for adults, total tonal confusion. It was canceled after just 13 episodes.